All right, ladies and gentlemen, please join in as I invite the speakers on stage. The topic is very interesting, the new consent economy, privacy, trust, and digital infrastructure. Please give a huge round of applause as I call the speaker's name, inviting them on stage, starting with Mr. Tarun Nazare, co-founder Neokred. Mr. Nageen Kommu, founder and CEO, Digitap.AI Enterprise Solution. Mr. V. Easwaran, Chief Operating Officer, Protean. Mr. Saurabh Gupta, co-founder and CEO, VeriSmart Ai. Mr. Ashok Hariharan, founder and CEO, IDfy. It's IDfy. And to conduct this session, I would like to invite the moderator to please join me on stage, Mr. Vaibhav Tambe, co-founder and CEO, TransBnk Solutions. Over to you, sir. Thank you so much. Yes. You need one more mic?
Hello. Hi, thanks everyone, and once again thanks the GFF and the entire community. It's been a great experience so far. I'm sure you all have experienced crazy experience so far, and then of course the word fintech, which is convergence of finance and technology. I think globally we have seen this evolving, and one of the foundation layer, the core foundation layer for this layer is the consent, right? And while a lot of products have been built similar to, let's say, our flagship product, which is loved by Modi ji and the entire world, UPI, even that has an underlying consent. But I think probably in the larger context, we had a lot of questions as bankers, as entrepreneurs, how exactly this is shaping. And I don't think we'll get a panel like this. Almost everybody is coming from the expertise. So we all, lesser mortals, we want to understand, especially, we'll break it down into a couple of things. One, of course, the Privacy Acts and DPDP. Of course, the user awareness, and more importantly, the concept, right? So, there's something which is very interesting called as zero knowledge proof. So maybe we can start with Saurabh, and then we can open up how exactly the foundation layer, why it is needed, and then maybe Ashok, you can talk about the exact architecture for consent. Saurabh.
So when we talk about consent, it is being highly misinterpreted that it's only about taking the consent from a user, and it's a kind of an umbrella consent, and which has been happening post GDPR implementation across the globe. But consent economy is not just limited to what consent it has been taken for. It is also about how the data access management, how the data, privacy, as well as data storage and more need to be inculcated across the ecosystem. It was a very nice thought which one of the founders said to me, that that will be the best ecosystem where consumers are being completely satisfied of how organizations are managing, storing, and handling their respective PII data, and with a complete transparency. So that's where we are looking at how we can build that ecosystem together. And that is the need of an hour in terms of bringing in that in a form of a framework altogether. We have done our set of effort into this direction, which obviously over the period of time we'll talk about that, and how that actually kind of getting unfolded in terms of automating the entire data journey to a consent mechanism, and also how consumer, being the principal data owner, is sitting in center of it, pulling all the threads and able to manage all the threads altogether.
No, good thought. Ashok, do you want to have a simplified summary, and then we can hear from Nageen about DPDP?
So obviously we've been working very closely on the topic of consent for about close to about 6 years now. and IDfy does have our own product. We have a product suite of about 8 products solving for consent. It's called Privy. Now, what we look at as consent, so first of all, the DPDP Act is not a consent governance act. It's not about just taking consent. It's actually about how do you manage data, how do you manage breaches. There's a bunch of things that it talks about very specifically around. One, obviously, is to take, you need to be able to take consent and revoke, and the principal has to be able to revoke consent. That is fundamental. But also that the consent needs to be granular, that it needs to be presented in all 22 languages. Apart from that, then post that, all your systems inside a bank, like for example, let's take any of the large banks, your internal systems have to be connected to this consent architecture in a way where if a customer comes and says, delete my data, you need to know where to go delete that data, right? If you look at any fiduciary today, the amount of data replication that they do, how many databases, some of them don't even know where their data is sitting. Maybe a tech guy has just pushed PII data to the to logs because he was monitoring it, and it's sitting there. So now there's a possibility of breach. How do you manage that breach? How do you manage third-party risk? Because the fiduciary is responsible for the security of your of the person's data. Therefore, third-party risk management comes into play. So it's actually a pretty vast space, and I can go on and on. I can cover that full 40 minutes on this topic. In the interest of not hoarding the mic, I will leave it at one last thought.
Yeah, please.
And Vaibhav, I told him to ask me this so that I can disagree with him, but I'm going to say it anyway. Account aggregator is not sufficient for consent, right? Like this narrative has to stop. Account aggregators has nothing to do with consent. Consent is far bigger, far deeper, and data is where the core thing is. You didn't ask me that question. I could have done this better, but anyway.
with a controversial thing.
I think we all, at least I come from, starting my career from, private sector bank or public sector bank. And we used to have simple thing. If you have some important documents, you lock it into the locker. If the work is done, just shred it, right? This data, open banking, everything looks so complicated. No, Nageen, do you want to talk about the need of DPDP and how is it getting shaped up? And of course, what value it's going to add? Or maybe as Ashok is saying, is it sufficient?
Thanks, Vaibhav. So basically, when we are talking about consent, right? So obviously, the most important act that comes into the mind is DPDP Act, right? And before we actually talk about consent, DPDP, we first have to understand as to why there is a need for why is it that we are talking about a user consent today, right? See, before that, over the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen a huge explosion on the digital public infrastructure platform, right? So now if you see, mostly predominantly in the Fintech and BFSI space, most of the customer onboarding or most of the products that are being sold with the use of this India Stack solutions or Aadhaar or PAN related solutions, right? Now, so a lot of companies, BFSI companies specifically, are relying on digital data of the consumer to onboard clients, to onboard customers, to sell them products, right? Which was not the case maybe 10 years ago. So now although that has made life a lot more simpler, clients have been able to do a lot more in terms of financial inclusion and all that. But that again brings back us to the question of, all right, it's the digital data that the end customer is actually sharing it with these financial institutions. Now, how is that data secure, right? So that is when that is the genesis actually of this DPDP Act, right? Now it is not about a consent, it is about how do I ensure that whatever data the consumer is or the end customer is providing to these financial institutions, how does it remain secure and private, right? They're two different things. Now, DPDP Act in general gives you the guidelines in terms of how do you keep this data secure, right? So even before keeping the data secure, how do you ensure that you have the right consent, first of all, from the end consumer is what it talks about. The second thing it talks about is for how long do you need the consent, how long do you need this data, and you are not supposed to store the data beyond that period. And it also talks about what mechanisms are you providing if the end customer wants to revoke his consent? How do you then delete the data, as Ashok was rightly pointing it out? More importantly, it also talks about what happens when there is a breach of this trust that the end consumer has placed on these financial institutions through the consent that the end consumer has given, right? So what remedies does the end consumer have? Whom does he go and approach, right? Is there a data protection officer that is there in each of these financial institutions whom he can go and approach saying my data has been leaked or my data has been used in an unauthorized manner, right? What sort of penalties can be levied by the regulators when this mistrust happens? So the DPDP Act in general talks about all these contours in order to make the entire data of the end consumer very secure and very private. So that's the contours of the DPDP Act.
Yeah. So I think we'll of course have a report launch. Tarun will talk about the report, but before that, Tarun, quickly we can hear from Easwaran sir. We of course covered the need, and in the paper era, of course, we did not have to do so much about the infrastructure. But what do you think were different principles which we need to take into account for this particular thing? And maybe we can talk quickly about the user awareness also. Yeah, Easwaran sir.
Thank you very much. Okay. While we talk about the DPDP Act and storing of the consent and trust and privacy, I'd like to step back and just bring certain issues which we need to tackle before we get into this. First and foremost, India has leapfrogged into the digital technology area much faster than any other country. We have the maximum digital penetration, if you look at it, with UPI and all things coming up. We might have the possibility the maximum number of mobile users. Now, where do we take this consent? We take this consent in our mobiles. Today, as it is, we all know most of the people, you get something where it says that terms and condition, it has to be clicked. Without clicking, you cannot move ahead. So by default, click it. Now we are bringing the consent into place. Now what I'm trying to tell you is, because I have been in the financial inclusion sphere for a long time, there's a huge part of the country which is illiterate for a lot of things, which works on the assisted model. Even people who are literate, they prefer to go to agent and do their filling ups. So when you're filling up, the guy needs to take care that if I'm telling I don't want to give a consent for this, the person who is actually inputting the thing is what I wanted. So that's something which we need to take care. So there's a lot of user awareness, creating a culture of what is consent, how to track it, how to maintain it, what the right way to give it. So that's something which we'll have to really think about it and put in place, because that's an area of big concern if you ask me. Thank you.
No, I think for the lesser mortals like us, this looks like a very complex structure. Tarun, I believe there's a first attempt to simplify it and put it in a report. What are your thoughts, about this particular topic and of course the report?
Thanks, Vaibhav. I think, once when the act was launched and it gave us a brief thought in terms of the consent, which is primarily for the data that is there. First, it gave us an impression that, okay, consent for which type of data? The PII data that we need to get the consent on. Now, what are the data fields which consist the PII data here? That was something that we digged upon, and that is available in our white paper. That was one such activity. Second activity is how many people are aware of, okay, what is the term consent here? Now, while the act says about notices, how many people are willing to read that respective notices whenever notice is facilitated, it is provided in their respective legal languages. How many people understand the legal wordings that is being displayed to them in their respective devices here. And many of us, we as Nageen said, that easily they'll just click on the checkbox and you can take the privacy consent and the terms and conditions over here. The Act specifically mentions that you have to specifically define what are the data fields, what is the validity, what is the purpose here. No one can just take your data for the will and fancy for it here. And what is the limitation of the data here? Everything that is mentioned, that is there in the white paper. So we have very granularly covered all the areas, especially the BFSI segment here, where, okay, if it is a bank, what are the products that they are offering? Every product has their respective databases. If a PII is sitting in a credit card databases, it is also sitting in a personal loan databases, also sitting in a savings account or even a current account databases over here. Then connecting that one customer ID to all these databases so that during the time of facilitating the acceptance of the consent, how does the user, the principal, data principal, also have the access to edit or revoke that respective consent? Yeah, so we have very granularly defined those terminologies, those connectors that is required.
Thanks, Tarun. We are all excited towards the launch of the report. But before that, so Ashok, I think we had seen the PSD2 payment system directive 2 in Europe, and also a lot of other open banking initiatives globally fueling the growth of embedded finance, and of course thereby making the financial inclusion of services which is quite accessible to everybody, right? And that's probably the way globally India and other geographies are looking at growing, because actually it's important to get the financial services, access to the tier 3, tier 4 users. And of course we talk about the cutting edge technologies like blockchain and all. But before we move there, what are the different principles and what are the steps with which the user awareness have to be created? Is there anything what you guys are also thinking on that?
I'll just talk about maybe the couple of implementations that we are doing and the nuances in that, and I think that's it. So one, I think Easwaran sir alluded to this. If you go to rural India, there's one phone for the whole family, right? So who's giving consent, number one? Did they understand consent is the question that they asked, which is why the law says that it needs to be presented in all 22 languages. But is language sufficient? Because do people understand, do they understand the nuances? Like, and to be honest, we don't, in the consent, it's very clear that we shouldn't put legal language in there. It's very specific, right? I'm taking this data for this purpose. Purpose of marketing. For marketing, therefore, if I don't give you a consent for marketing, please do not send me emails or messages. How many of you have been troubled by that consumer durable finance company that keeps calling you every day 3 times? Everybody has been, and the builders, some of them got our data without our permission. Some of them stole data from maybe the security guard outside with his register. God knows how they got it, right? So the Act is very specific, right? If you have my data and you're using it for a purpose, then you necessarily need my consent. Doesn't matter where you procured it from. Because the moment it has been digitized, that means you're calling me, you're putting it in the Salesforce database, you need to get my consent. So the first step is take the consent at the point of capturing the data. Second is being able to very clearly define what consent means to that user. So I think that's one big problem, right? So if it is one single phone, then how do you know it was Ashok who gave consent and not my sister Aparna, right? That is one part of the problem. Second part of the problem, if you look at journey, if you look at any journey, there's 3 stages for a journey, right? A customer, before he has started entering his data, before he gives a consent, he is not yet your customer. So what do you do with that data at that point? Post giving consent, you have still not approved him as a customer, because now there's a post giving consent before he becomes a customer, there's certain sets of things you can do with that customer. Post him becoming a customer, then there's a different sets of things you need to do. Now imagine first stage to second stage. At the first stage, you don't have your CRM ID yet, no reference ID for the customer. But stage 2, you have a reference ID. So now you link back a reference ID to that customer post facto. So how that nuance is actually quite a problem in systems that we have been designing today. That's a re-architecture of your whole infrastructure, if you may. Post that, then there's treatment of data. Now I have, what is PII data? If you look at any bank, they collect about 80 data fields. or more sometimes. But let's say 80 to 90 data fields. Is address PII data, is only name PII data, is a combination PII data? All of this defines how you encrypt the data, where do you store the data, how do you replicate data. So all those nuances also get into play, right? Yeah. So it's interesting because it's really a re-architecture, and therefore you have to relook at everything that you have done and the way your processes are designed as well. And that's sort of where it's going, right?
No, and I think when it comes to the actual payments transaction or a large corporate or business transactions in transaction banking, I think this foundational layer of consent becomes very important. And Saurabh, from your perspective, how does these principles, what you guys have been using, how it's helping your sort of customers, and how exactly, what Ashok was talking about, the awareness or the, first principle thinking, how you guys are building?
So, there are multiple ways of solving this problem statement. One particular approach which we have taken is that we have made everything enterprise-centric. In the country where people are still struggling for roti kapda makan, you cannot go and ask them and train them of how to manage their consent. It's a humongous task. It's not scalable. It takes years to do this, and by the time it will happen, the damage is already done. So that's why in the very first statement I mentioned that it has to be enterprise first. It has to be the organization, has to be kind of made aware well that how they store user data, how the data access management, what kind of a cryptographic hash and other set of things are need to be managed, stored, accessed, and a transparent layer we build across them. So what we have done is that we have created a framework, a data framework, where user sits in between, and they are able to manage all of those points where they've ever given the data while just having a visibility of it. So we have created one app which is called a Data Kavach app. What it do, so let's say you're a person who first of all doesn't know how many places you have given your data so far. So it helps you explore in one single click where all you have given the consent for that. So we have partnered with a lot of large enterprises on that particular matter, that how they are holding the user data without passing that data to us. So it's just simple way where we use verifiable credential and zero knowledge proof. This is a bit of alien terms.
Very, very interesting concept, and I hope when you build this particular thing, and I'm sure the audience and we all would love to experience that. But one last question about that is, how are you then creating the user awareness into this? Are you looking at some digital campaigns, or how is the digital awareness happening?
So see, point is, because DPDP is again more enterprise first, they have created a framework where they would say that we will penalize any organization not following certain guidelines around the data privacy piece itself. So we are taking the leeway or advantage of that particular notion amongst the enterprise of how they manage that part of the data. And now they will educate their respective consumers that how to manage this particular thing. Because if they don't do this, the penalty anyhow will be happening on the first party data platform.
Okay, so we're going to penalize the enterprise customers. But I think we have 3 to 4 minutes left. Nageen, quickly, maybe we can talk about some real life example of how this consent infrastructure is powering, let's say, a use case of lending maybe, so that which is quite close to the fintech hearts. How does it help in terms of onboarding or collections?
See, if you ask for a real life example, right, I think maybe 3-4 years back, if you had asked me about a real life example, we would have struggled to provide any consent real life example. But today, I think, I know Ashok pointed out to that a little bit, but account aggregator framework actually gives you a very good contours in terms of how a consent needs to be taken, right?
Disagree.
Yeah. But see, it is, what he says is also right. Account aggregator is not consent, but it provides you a framework in terms of how a consent needs to be taken, right? Or at least now, with all financial institutions using account aggregator, you are at least able to tell them that these are the things that are needed in a consent structure, right? like the basic principles like for how long do you need the consent, what is the purpose of taking the consent, can the customer revoke the consent, for what data points is he giving the consent, is he giving the consent for only the mobile number or only for the PAN number or things like that, right? So account aggregator is a very good example in my opinion about the consent to start with, but as he rightly pointed out, it's not, account aggregator is just not about consent or it's about fetching data, but it's fetching data with the right framework of consent built in, right? And it's in a way where you cannot do anything without the consent there, right? So there is no middle path or gray area there. It's either you give the consent, you get the data, or you don't give the consent, you don't get the data, right? That's one of the real life examples.
Good example. And I think most of us over here, and including all the panelists, are used to getting those 50 forms. Somebody will say, sir, jaha jaha chokdi mara wahan sign karo. Right? I think we all are used to that. And I'm sure whenever we get something like this, you'll always say yes, yes, yes to everything, right? And then, of course, the device and China and Moon and somebody from Mars also will access our data. And that's how we all are, used to signing that white paper for so long. So maybe Protean being one of the leading infrastructure company, how is it the framework or the entire, summarize, if you can just give a summary, how exactly this is changing in the new era?
I'll also briefly tell you on what Protean is working on. We are actually creating a framework because we also have experience in the account aggregator space. While we agree, disagree, whether trust or consent, that's fine. Okay, but yes, we got experience there, and based on that, we are actually trying to make it simpler because we are trying to make it easy for the end consumer to identify, bring check boxes, pop it up properly at the right place, bring in vernacular elements to it, give some nudge to it, and also have a, a kind of consent vault, because that's something very important now. And also for the customer, because it's
so
it's
just
a
for
dynamic
everyone's
thing.
purpose, consent vault is similar to what the Kavach, what you're talking about. Okay,
Yes.
please.
And because now it's going to be dynamic, just like a KYC, I need to remember as to when is this going to expire, because it's a expiry. That's a new element which is coming. Already we have a KYC, now this is as a invocation or revocation or re-auth, whatever I have to do. So we have to remember that. So we are building a framework which will bring in those elements, which will be able to work across channels, whether it's web, whether it's mobile apps, integrate with third-party applications, give reminders, and the entire work. That's what we are working on.
So very interesting. I think this topic, because it's a foundation layer of the entire fintech, I'm sure it's going to take a lot of time, but maybe I think we just have, I think we wanted 4 hours for this topic, but they only gave us 40 minutes. So thanks for that. Maybe quick couple of questions can we take? And then we're going to have a report launch, Tarun? We're going to have a report launch? Oh, it's already launched. Oh, thanks. So maybe, Tarun, we can take a couple of questions if it's possible. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sir.
Nice to hear about so much about consent. So there are multiple questions I put on the chat, but one question is, given that the DPDP says that it will be granular consent, appreciate the tools that you're making. Appreciate the tools that you're making, but do you think it will be very difficult for a consumer or a principal to actually start managing consents across so many different apps? And what can be done more from a B2C point of view to help the consumer manage that? Some of you spoke about the language as well, but managing that. And then a follow-up is, do you think AI has a role to play in that?
So there are 2 parts to this problem, right? One is to look at it from a fiduciary's perspective or to look at it from a data principal perspective. From a data principal perspective, there are hundreds of places he would have given consent in, and today he doesn't know where all he has given consent. There's an indication in the Act which talks about consent manager, which is actually looking at the problem from a principal's perspective, and therefore all fiduciaries, hopefully at some point, should connect to a consent manager and submit to, so that they submit to a data repository of sorts. And in DEPA guidelines, by the way, there's something called the consent repository, which India has not referenced in the DPDP Act per se, but that's sort of what the consent manager is supposed to do. But from a fiduciary's perspective, there's a very important responsibility that the fiduciary has, which is one, to tell you what you have given consent for, and to present that consent in granular format. Granular, as in it doesn't need to be overly granular. There'll be let's say it's a bank, let's say you're opening a current account, you're saying, here's my blah, blah, here's my name. Some of them are legitimate use. By the way, there is no term called legitimate use in DPDP Act, but the RBI regulation supersedes the DPDP Act on that angle. So you can collect N number of things. Because of opening a bank account, you need that data as per as regulation. Then there are non-mandatory consents, which will be your marketing, cross-selling, upselling, send you messages on WhatsApp, send you messages on email, etc. For that, you will need specified consent. So in total, at least from implementation perspective, wherever we are implementing, there's about 5 to 6 tick marks that you need to give. The role of AI in this, again, is pretty strong, because imagine if a bank has 250 journeys, they have 250 possible consents, all to be translated in 22 languages. Any product manager will go and do ungli there, and your consents are gone. I'm a product manager, I know that's what I like to do. I don't like these buttons. So that's sort of what I would remove immediately. So how does a DPO handle this? In translation, that's where AI gets a very important step, is that being able to translate these consent into all the 22 languages. Now, I'll give you a very nuanced example here. Think about PAN verification. If I want to convert that in Hindi, that shouldn't say Tawa verification. It should still say PAN verification, right? So the nuance of the AI model itself is important in the way we translate. And also keeping in mind all the regulatory compliances as well, RBI, SEBI, IRDA. So being able to see whether this consent is sufficient, number one. Number two, regularly saying that this is out of compliance. Or number three, being able to translate to all 22 languages. I think AI is the only way to pull it off. Otherwise, no company will be able to function in this country if we had to do it manually, right? So
thankfully, we're not talking about AI. But one more question, maybe the last one. Maybe we can have another section after, yeah.
Hi. Basically, it's more to do with a regulatory function that should cover all the aspects of consent, privacy, and everything together, because right now consumer is at the stake of everyone who has their data. Okay, I get calls from every possible person on this earth. They can just have access to my number, and they can call for loan or any kind of credit.
Insurance.
Is there insurance? You know, even D&D registry is not working these days. So forget about that. Yeah. So, and Airtel has come up with spam also, but then still we are getting some spam calls. So there is no foolproof, version that can help it. But I think data itself is such a big industry that needs a regulatory body that controls it end to end, so that every aspect of data misuse is covered under it, and there is a defined guideline, and there should be a regulation online available, because right now the consumers are aware. Most of the consumers are digitally aware that where they can go and complain about something. So they should have, I think it's a need of the hour that we have a proper regulation like an RBI kind of structure to regulate this data privacy, consent, and the whole cycle of consumer end to end. So is there anything in process right now from the government perspective, or is it just at the...
Yeah. So, see, point is, I have to put two important points across this thought. First of all, regulation is something which will never bring anything to execution. It is only a technology framework, or like, you know how DPI for identity or DPI for payments has been created, the same way DPI for consent management has to be created. That is one aspect of it. Second important thing, when you talk about the regulation in per se for the data privacy and the consent management, lot of it is being covered into the DPDP. But at the same time, every other, different regulators like RBI, SEBI, IRDI, or maybe even the civil aviation ministries and other set of regulated sectors, they will put and across, their respective regulated RE entities, that these all additional things you have to follow while you are, following the DPDP Act altogether. Third important thing, like what I feel is how this problem can be solved is that when we are able to mask the data across the ecosystem and pass on that control to an individual in a very seamless manner, where, let's say, I'll give you a very simple example you might be able to relate. You go to a hotel and do a check-in. Everyone bluntly, they just pass on their passport, your Aadhaar card, and maybe PAN, and your mobile number and email ID.
It's lying on the table.
It's lying on the table. It's on their shelf.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when a data theft would happen? It will never happen at maybe the hotel level or the group hotel level. It will happen at the last mile itself. Okay, which means a manager or maybe someone would actually sell this data to someone for as less as 20 rupees, 50 rupees per record. Okay, so now what need to be done is to have a better practice and a technology in place. So I'm not sure how many of you in the room is aware. We have been like a decentralized data framework behind Digitap.AI as well. Idea is to make it completely privacy driven, no central storage of data, and at the same time, make it accessible across all the touch points. Whether it may be a hotel check-in, whether it may be when you are talking to your bank, whether it may be when you are talking to your telecom, or maybe any other physical infrastructure altogether. Like when you go to any other physical access management, a corporate house, they will take your photo, they will take your proof of identity, they will take proof of address, everything. So your data is anyway being compromised with one single touch point.
Data is money and it should be given even equal respect.
I think there's one specific question you had around the regulator who's a regulator. In the DPDP Act, there is a reference to the DPB, which is the Data Protection Board. The Data Protection Board is being constituted as we speak. Within 6 months, they should possibly start to operate. Having said that, we already know the sectoral regulators have already started asking the individual fiduciaries which they govern on their basically their DPDP compliance framework, and they started asking those questions. But as a data principle, you should be able to raise concerns to the DPB, hopefully in the next 6 months to a year, when the rules, hopefully the rules are out sometime.
You can add and then we can conclude, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just taking 30 seconds more here to answer some of the question on data. Look, if you have been reading newspapers in the last few weeks, there have been celebrities who have been going to court telling you should not be taking my photograph. So now photograph is a data. So somebody today clicks my photo in front of me, I can tell I have not given you consent to click my photo. So it is coming to that. So we need to see at what level we need to stop, or we need to allow this to happen. Or you need to put then the consent into the camera, so the camera detects that this person has not given consent to take a photograph, and it should not click.
Sir, consent is myth in India, let me tell you honestly.
It has to come to that level.
Because consent is like, if you want my services, you have to give me consent. So
I think,
it's really not, it is like forceful.
So I think we can actually go on and on, and I saw there are a lot of other questions. But my request would be to, of course, take this question offline because we have the next panel over here. But please feel free to connect outside. Thanks a lot for being a wonderful audience, and thanks for being there. And I think over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was such a thought-provoking discussion. Let's give a huge round of applause to our speakers and moderators. Thank you for sharing these insights with us.